The iron gates groaned, a protracted, metallic lament that vibrated through the soles of my boots. Each inch of their descent was a deliberate exhalation of dread, the sound clinging to the air long after the final clang. Blackwood Asylum. The name itself felt like a brand seared onto the back of my hand. I traced the layout with my boots, the gravel crunching beneath, a brittle counterpoint to the oppressive silence. A silence so complete it felt viscous, a tangible weight pressing against my eardrums. No shadows existed here. A perpetual twilight clung to everything, the candlelight orange bleeding into the deep velvet of the walls, blurring the edges of reality. My hand tightened around the charcoal stick, its rough texture a small comfort. I was mapping, charting, attempting to impose order on this place. A futile exercise, I suspected. The memory of what I was mapping, the 20y of it, remained frustratingly fragmented, like shards of glass scattered across a dark floor. Loss. That was the constant, the undercurrent of everything. A profound, aching absence, a flicker of movement at my periphery. The cat, its eyes, those shifting, unnatural hues of emerald and amethyst, fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. It brushed against my leg, a silken rasp against the wool of my trousers. I didn't need to look down to know it was staring. It always stared. It was a conduit, I felt it, though for what I could say. The Proxy, a ridiculous name for a creature radiating such palpable wrongness. The violin began. A mournful, fractured melody, the sound of a broken string 742B9, delta gamma, 44, echoing from somewhere deep within the asylum's bowels. It wasn't tea music, not really. It was a dirge, a lament for something lost, something broken. I tried to capture it in my notebook, to translate the sound into a visual representation of its despair. The pen faltered in my hand, the charcoal refusing to adhere to the paper. A tremor ran through my arm, a subtle protest against the task. I forced myself to breathe, to refocus. The walls were damp, the wallpaper peeling in long, mournful strips. I ran a finger along the surface, the texture gritty beneath my nail. Dust, thick and undisturbed, coated every surface. A faint, sweet odor permeated the air. Fui, something akin to decaying lilies, and something else. Something metallic. A subtle shift, a pressure. I felt it then, a disquieting pull, a silent urging towards the asylum's heart. It wasn't tea physical, not exactly. More like a resonance, a vibration deep within my bones, pulling me forward, promising something I could name. I resisted, digging my heels into the gravel, anchoring myself to the present. The Proxy wound around my ankles, a silent plea or warning. I could decipher which. Its gaze intensified, the shifting colors in its eyes seeming to deepen, to draw me in. I looked at my hand, the charcoal stick, a pathetic defense against the encroaching dread. I attempted to sketch the cat, to fix it in place, to understand it. The charcoal snapped. The silence returned, heavier now, pregnant with an unspoken threat. The violin's lament ceased abruptly, leaving a void that felt even more oppressive than the silence before. Then, a new sound, a faint, rhythmic pulse. It began subtly, a tremor in the floorboards, a vibration in the air. It grew steadily, resonating through the walls, through my very being. It seemed to originate not from outside, but from within. From within fond. Thump, thump, thump. A slow, deliberate beat, echoing the rhythm of a heart. My heart. The pulse intensified, a faint, insistent drumbeat against the backdrop of the asylum's suffocating silence. Thump, 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 asterisk. The pulse intensified, a slow, deliberate drumbeat resonating within my ribs. Thump, 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 thump. Thumpy. It felt less like my heart now, more like a metronome marking time towards an inevitable, unknown conclusion. I tightened my grip on the charcoal, the grit scraping against my palm. The Proxy, a silent, watchful sentinel, rubbed against my leg, a low, guttural purr vibrating in its chest. Its emerald and amethyst eyes burned into me, reflecting the candlelight orange of the peeling wallpaper. I was charting Corridor C. The walls here were narrower, the oppressive silence more acute. The dampness clung to the air, a clammy film on my skin. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. I attempted to sketch the corridor's length, the lines blurring under my hand. The tremor in my arm returned, stronger this time, a physical manifestation of the disorientation settling in my mind. Then she appeared. Not Tumby the corridor. Not exactly. More like superimposed upon it, a shimmering distortion in the air, a woman, older. The same bone structure, the same haunted eyes, but etched with lines of weariness and a chilling serenity. She wore a dress of deep velvet, the color swallowed by the shadows, the scent of decaying lilies, that metallic tang intensified, almost suffocating a sharp intake of breath. It wasn't mine. It emanated from her, a silent expulsion of air that seemed to ripple the very fabric of the corridor. Her voice, when it came, was a low, resonant murmur, barely audible above the internal drumbeat. Resist the pattern. The words hung in the air, devoid of context, devoid of explanation. I opened my mouth to ask, to demand clarity, but the question died in my throat. Her gaze was fixed on some distant point, a vacant intensity that chilled me to the core. The proxy hissed, a rasping, guttural sound, and arched its back, its fur bristling. It seemed to be reacting to a presence, to the unsettling calm radiating from her form. I felt a sudden, visceral urge to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of this encounter. Resist the pattern, she repeated, her voice a mournful echo in the confined space. The violin began again, its fractured melody a mocking counterpoint to her cryptic warning. 742, B9, Delta Gamma. The sound seemed to twist and distort, to burrow into my skull. I felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying disorientation. I looked at my hands, at the charcoal, stained fingers, at the tremor that racked my arm. Was this madness? Was I losing my grip on reality? The woman's image flickered, like a faulty projection, threatening to dissolve into the shadows. Then I saw it, nestled amongst my charting tools, a small, intricately carved porcelain bird. Its eyes were painted a startling, unnatural blue, and its beak was slightly ajar, as if poised to sing a silent, unsettling song. I hadn't placed it there. I didn't recognize it. A prickle of unease crawled down my spine. The woman's form wavered, the edges of her image blurring, dissolving. Resist, she began, but the sound was swallowed by a rising crescendo of the violin's lament. The proxy emitted a low, mournful wail, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the air. Her image vanished completely, leaving behind only the lingering scent of decaying lilies and a profound sense of loss. A single black feather drifted slowly to the floor, settling silently on the damp gravel. Thump, 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 fur. The pulse continued, a relentless, unwavering beat. The pulse. It wasn't just within me anymore. It bled outwards, a phantom limb vibrating through the very walls of Blackwood. Thump, thump, thump. Then, a new sound layered over a TTI. A crackle, like dry leaves burning, spitting from the antiquated radio perched on a nearby table. It wasn't tea music. It was me. My own heartbeat, amplified, distorted, a mechanical mockery of life. The proxy, nestled at my feet, emitted a low growl, a rumbling vibration against the soles of my boots. Its emerald and amethyst eyes pulsed with an unnatural light, reflecting the candlelight orange of the peeling wallpaper. I froze, charcoal poised above my sketchpad, the tremor in my hand intensifying. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp stone and something else, something acrid, like ozone after a lightning strike. The broadcast looped. Fun thump, thump, thump. Each repetition chipped away at the fragile composure I'd managed to construct. It felt invasive, a violation. Someone was listening. Someone was listening. Someone was wide recording. My breath hitched, a shallow, desperate gasp. I glanced at the radio, a hulking brass and wood monstrosity that seemed to hum with malevolent intent. The proxy began to vocalize, a series of guttural clicks and hisses unlike anything I'd heard before. It wasn't tita purr, not a meow. It was a language, ancient and unsettling, spilling from its throat. The sounds resonated in the narrow corridor, bouncing off the damp walls, a discordant counterpoint to the relentless rhythm of my own heart. I tried to focus on the sketching, to ground myself in the familiar act of charting, but the lines blurred under my hand. 742, B9, Delta Gamma. The numbers echoed in my mind, a phantom code. I had to find the source. The radio wasn't connected to anything. There were no wires, no antennas. It simply was. I pushed myself to my feet, the tremor in my legs making the movement unsteady. The corridor seemed to shift as I walked, the familiar layout subtly altered. The wallpaper, that faded floral pattern, seemed to writhe, the colors deepening, swallowing the candlelight. Each turn I took led to another identical corridor. The dampness clung to my skin, a clammy film that raised gooseflesh on my arms. The air grew colder, the scent of decay intensifying. I consulted my map, but the lines seemed wrong. The angles skewed. Blackwood was playing tricks on me. It was twisting its labyrinthine corridors into a mockery of logic. The porcelain bird, the one with the unsettlingly blue eyes, had moved. It was no longer nestled amongst my charting tools. It now sat perched on a nearby shelf, its beak slightly ajar, as if listening to the broadcast alongside me. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I hadn't moved it. I didn't remember moving it, the thump. Thump, thump. The heartbeat broadcast continued its relentless assault. The Proxy-esque guttural vocalizations grew more frantic, a desperate plea in a language I could too understand. I felt a growing sense of panic, a claustrophobic dread that threatened to suffocate me. The sensation of being pulled towards an unseen point intensified, a subtle tugging at my very being. I stumbled, catching myself on a damp wall. The wallpaper felt cold and slick against my palm. The scent of decaying lilies was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sounds, the smells, the unsettling feeling of being watched. Then, as abruptly as it began, the broadcast stopped. The crackle ceased. The relentless thump, thump, vanished. The silence that followed was even more unsettling than the noise had been. A silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. A new sound emerged from the darkness, a whisper. A child. His voice, soft and breathy, barely audible above the ringing in my ears. She's almost ready. The silence clung, thick and suffocating. It pressed against my eardrums, a vacuum threatening to implode. The child's whisper thipine she. She's almost ready, for lingered, a phantom echo in the damp air. I stood frozen, charcoal dust clinging to my fingertips, the map a useless tangle in my hand. Blackwood had granted a reprieve, a deceptive lull before the storm. I knew it wouldn't last. The Proxy, a shifting silhouette in the candlelight orange, nudged my leg. A low guttural rumble emanated from its throat, insistent, demanding. It turned, its emerald and amethyst eyes fixed on a section of the wall I hadn't noticed before. A subtle discoloration, a patch of darker stone, almost perfectly concealed within the faded floral pattern. I ran a gloved hand over it, feeling the rough texture beneath my fingertips. It wasn't a seam, not a crack. It was a door. A slight pressure, a click, and the stone pivoted inward, revealing a small, recessed alcove. The air spilling from it was colder, heavier, saturated with the scent of ozone and something else. Something ancient and unsettling, like crushed minerals and forgotten rituals. The Proxy slipped into the alcove, its form disappearing into the shadows. I followed, my pulse a slow, deliberate thud against the oppressive silence. Within the alcove, nestled on a velvet cushion, sat a jar. It wasn't glass but a dark opaque material I could identify. Inside, a swirling mass of black sand. It wasn't resting on the cushion, it hovered, a subtle, shimmering defiance of gravity. The rustling was faint, almost imperceptible, like the whisper of silk against silk. But it was there. A constant, unsettling murmur. The Proxy circled the jar, its vocalizations intensifying. A complex series of clicks and hisses that felt less like communication and more like a pronouncement. It nudged my hand, its emerald and amethyst eyes burning into mine, a silent command. I hesitated. The sand seemed to pulse, to breathe. A miniature galaxy contained within the jar, 742B9, Delta Gamma. The numbers swam in my vision, a discordant melody echoing the violin, as broken string. I reached for my sketchpad, attempting to capture the anomaly. The charcoal felt clumsy in my hand, the lines blurring on the page. The floral wallpaper seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision, the candlelight orange deepening, swallowing the details. I tried to focus, to impose order on the chaos, but the image fractured, distorted. The sand within the jar seemed to mirror the distortion, its swirling patterns becoming grotesque, mocking. A flicker of movement in the corridor, a shadow, fleeting and indistinct, disappearing around a corner. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Another flicker, and then a face, a woman's face, pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with silent terror. She vanished as quickly as she appeared. Another, a man, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes fixed on something beyond my perception. Gone. They were former patients, I realized. Ghosts of Blackwood's past, trapped within its labyrinthine corridors, their faces frozen in expressions of unimaginable horror. The violin's melody grew more discordant, a frantic, desperate plea. Sephrich. Thump, thump, thump. The Proxy's vocalizations escalated, a frantic chorus. It poured at my leg, urging me closer to the jar. I felt a growing sense of dread, a suffocating claustrophobia. The walls seemed to be closing in, the candlelight orange intensifying, blurring the edges of my vision. The scent of ozone was overwhelming, burning my nostrils. I wanted to leave, to flee this place, to escape the unsettling presence that permeated the air, but something held me back. A compulsion, a fascination, a morbid curiosity. I reached out, my fingers trembling, drawn towards the swirling black sand. The rustling grew louder, a hypnotic whisper. A single grain of black sand detached itself from the swirling mass. It floated, suspended in the air, a tiny speck of darkness against the candlelight orange. It drifted towards me, slowly, deliberately, until it landed softly on my outstretched palm. The grain settled on my palm, a cold, unsettling weight. It felt wrong, not inherently malevolent, but fundamentally fully out of place, like a shard of night sky fallen into a sunlit room. The Proxy emitted a series of sharp clicks, a frustrated cadence. It nudged my leg again, more insistent this time, its emerald and amethyst eyes burning with an unsettling urgency. The numbers 5742B9 Delta Gamma Fuffen pulsed behind my eyelids, a rhythmic throbbing that seemed to sync with the jar, as unsettling rustling. I tried to reorient myself, to grasp the thread of what I was supposed to be doing, mapping. That was it. Charting the labyrinthine corridors of Blackwood. But the corridors, they weren't cooperating. The floral wallpaper, once a predictable pattern, now seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision. A fleeting impression of a staircase where a hallway should have been. A doorway that wasn't there a moment ago. The candlelight orange deepened, swallowing the details, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. The Proxy began to pace, a restless tremor vibrating through its slender frame. Its vocalizations escalated, a frantic, almost hysterical chorus of clicks and hisses. I felt a growing disorientation, a sickening lurch in my stomach. The scent of ozone intensified, sharp and metallic, clinging to the back of my throat. I wanted to anchor myself, to find something solid, something real. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the feeling of the charcoal dust clinging to my fingertips, the weight of my gloves. A creak, a low, grinding groan that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the asylum. The alcove, moments before a contained space, now seemed to extend to for a breathe. The floral wallpaper rippled, the pattern distorting into something grotesque, something almost organic. The map in my hand felt like a mocking absurdity, a futile attempt to impose order on chaos. Another creak, louder this time. A shifting, scraping sound, like immense stones grinding against each other. I turned, expecting to see a change in the corridor, but it was the walls themselves that were moving. Slowly, subtly, but undeniably. The wallpaper stretched, the shadows elongated, the candlelight orange deepening into a suffocating gloom. The violin's melody warped, a mournful lament punctuated by the further thump. Thump of my own frantic heartbeat. A fragment of memory surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. A child's laughter, echoing through a sun-drenched garden. A woman's voice, singing a lullaby. A feeling of warmth, of belonging. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only a hollow ache. These weren't my memories, they couldn't be. Yet, they felt familiar. The porcelain birds. I caught a glimpse of them in the corner of my eye, a cluster of white, silent figures perched on a nearby shelf. Their painted eyes seemed to follow my every move, their expressions inscrutable. A chill ran down my spine. They were always there. Weren't they? Just beyond the periphery, silent witnesses to my descent. The Proxy emitted a piercing shriek, a sound that resonated deep within my bones. It poured at my leg, its emerald and amethyst eyes blazing with an almost frantic intensity. I felt a pull, a subtle but insistent force drawing me towards an unseen point. It wasn't physical, not exactly. It was a pressure, a compulsion, a feeling of being drawn towards something I could comprehend. The walls continued to shift, the grinding creaks growing louder, more insistent. The candlelight orange intensified, blurring the edges of my vision. I stumbled, my hand reaching out to steady myself against the cold, damp stone, and then I felt it. A change in the wall, a subtle alteration in the texture, a slight indentation that hadn't been there before. I ran my gloved hand over the surface, feeling for a seam, a crack, anything that would explain the anomaly. And then I found it. A barely perceptible line, a subtle shift in the pattern of the floral wallpaper, a click, a soft, almost silent click. And then a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a dark, seemingly endless corridor. The air spilling from it was colder, heavier, saturated with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and unsettling, like crushed minerals and forgotten rituals. The violin's melody reached a fever pitch, a frantic, desperate plea that seemed to hang in the air. The Proxy let out a triumphant hiss and disappeared into the darkness. The shift wasn't violent, not a sudden lurch, but a gradual compression. The candlelight orange deepened, bleeding into a suffocating crimson that seemed to stain the very air. The floral wallpaper, no longer a pattern, felt like a physical pressure against my skin, the velvet texture somehow amplified, pressing in on me, stealing the breath from my lungs. Each bloom seemed to pulse, a slow, deliberate expansion and contraction that mirrored the frantic beat of my own heart. Thump, thump, thump. The violin's lament twisted further, the broken string keening a discordant note that resonated within my skull. The Proxy, a silent shadow against the deepening gloom, began to manipulate objects. A porcelain teacup levitated from a nearby table, rotating slowly before settling gently on a stack of forgotten correspondence. Then, a framed photograph a woman with eyes that mirrored my own, yet held a sadness I couldn't comprehend, drifted across the room, pausing momentarily before settling against the wall. It was a subtle choreography, a silent instruction. They began as a faint susurrus, a rustling of fabric in the periphery. Then, they coalesced, forming fragmented sentences, echoes of conversations I'd never had, regrets I'd never voiced. Lost, forgotten, she remembers. The words slithered into my mind, cold and invasive. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing them away, but they clung to the edges of my consciousness, a persistent, insidious drone. The porcelain birds, they were everywhere. No longer a cluster, but a silent, watchful horde. They perched on shelves, on chairs, on the edges of tables, their painted eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. I counted them, a futile attempt to quantify the growing dread. 20, 30, 40. Their numbers seemed to multiply with each passing moment, their silence amplifying the oppressive atmosphere. A faint clicking sound began to weave itself into the whispers, a rhythmic pulse that resonated with the jar of black sand in my pocket. Click, click, click. The Proxy nudged my leg, a subtle pressure guiding me forward. I resisted, clinging to the remnants of my own will, but the pull was undeniable. It wasn't physical force, but a deeper compulsion, a feeling of inevitability. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single chilling phrase, "Embrace the reflection." My reflection, I hadn't dared to look. The mirrors in Blackwood, they weren't mirrors, not in the conventional sense. They were windows into something else. I forced myself to glance at a tarnished silver mirror hanging on the wall. The image staring back was familiar, yet subtly wrong. My eyes seemed deeper, darker, shadowed by a profound sadness. The corners of my mouth were turned down in a perpetual frown. A flicker of something alien, something predatory, danced within those eyes. The clicking grew louder, more insistent, originating from the porcelain birds. They swayed in unison, their painted eyes gleaming in the crimson light. The pressure intensified, the whispers swirling around me, a vortex of fragmented memories and unspoken fears. I stumbled, my hand reaching out to steady myself against the cold, damp stone. The scent of ozone intensified, sharp and metallic, mingling with the cloying sweetness of decay. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, a strangled gasp lost in the oppressive silence. The Proxy emitted a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the asylum. The wallpaper pressed closer, the velvet texture suffocating. The violin's melody reached a crescendo, a desperate, mournful plea that seemed to echo the despair within my own soul. Click, click. The clicking was deafening now, a relentless rhythmic pulse that threatened to shatter my sanity. And then I felt it, a cold, ceramic weight settling on my neck. I froze, every muscle tense, every nerve screaming in protest. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached up, my gloved hand brushing against the smooth, unyielding surface. I lowered my hand, bringing the object into the crimson light. A porcelain bird. Its painted eyes stared directly into mine, reflecting the terror in my own gaze. The porcelain bird pressed cold against my neck, a mocking weight. The crimson light bled across the room, painting the velvet wallpaper in shades of arterial red. The clicking intensified, a frantic percussion against the backdrop of the violin's fractured melody. Screech. Wine drip. The sound wasn't just a note, it was a disintegration, a splintering of something once whole. Each discordant pulse resonated within my skull, a physical manifestation of the unraveling within me. I tried to focus on the black sand. It was spilling now, a slow, inexorable trickle from the jar. Fine grains obsidian black, creeping across the polished floor like a miniature, malevolent tide. I watched them coalesce, forming patterns, not random, but deliberate. Geometric shapes, unsettlingly familiar. They seemed to shift and writhe, mocking my attempts at comprehension. The scent of ozone sharpened, a metallic tang that coated my tongue. A presence, I felt it before I saw it. A coldness radiating from the periphery. A weight on my shoulders that wasn't mine. The asylum's former residents. They were there in the shadows pressed against the walls, their faces gaunt and hollowed. They didn't speak, didn't move yet. Their silent terror was a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket of despair. Their eyes wide and vacant, fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. Click, click, click. The porcelain birds amplified their scrutiny. The Proxy emitted another guttural rumble, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stone beneath my feet. It nudged me, a subtle pressure guiding me towards a cracked silver mirror hanging on the far wall. I resisted, my muscles rigid, my breath shallow. The whispers returned, a chorus of fragmented voices slithering into my mind. Lost, forgotten. She remembers. They were closer now, more insistent, more insidious. I squeezed my eyes shut, a futile attempt to block them out. The violin's lament twisted further, a single, jarring note piercing through the chaos. It hung in the air, suspended, a discordant echo of my own fractured state. I opened my eyes, drawn to the mirror. It wasn't a clear reflection. The silver was pitted and scarred, distorting the image. But I saw her. Or I thought I did. A woman standing where I should be. Her posture was identical to mine, her clothing the same, but the eyes were different, older, worn, filled with a profound, unsettling sadness. The corners of her mouth were turned down in a perpetual frown, a grimace of resignation. There was a flicker of something else there too, something predatory, something that didn't belong. I recoiled, stumbling backward. The black sand continued to spread, the geometric patterns growing more complex, more menacing. The former patients shuffled closer, their silent terror intensifying. The Proxy pressed against me, its glowing eyes burning into my soul. The whispers escalated, coalescing into a single chilling phrase, "Embrace the reflection." I felt a tremor run through me, a deep-seated certainty that this wasn't a reflection at all. It was a glimpse of what I would become. The violin let out a final mournful wail, a desperate plea that seemed to echo the despair within my own soul. Screech. Wine drip. The clicking was a deafening roar now, drowning out everything else. I reached out, my gloved hand trembling, and touched the cold, damp surface of the mirror. The image stared back, unwavering, unyielding. The woman twung. The future me smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of the lips that sent a shiver down my spine. The smile wasn't reassuring. It was knowing, a silent acknowledgement of a fate already sealed. The black sand swirled around my ankles, a tangible representation of the darkness closing in. The violin stopped. Silence, a suffocating, absolute silence, and then a single jarring note. The silence fractured, not with a crash, but a crystalline shattering. A chorus, friendin' chirp, chirp, chirp. 1,000 tiny voices emanating from the porcelain birds lining the walls. Each chirp resonated with a sickening familiarity, a mocking echo of the heartbeat that had plagued me. The radio wasn't broadcasting, it was endiving broadcast. The birds, they were the transmitters. The Proxy nudged me again, a relentless pressure guiding me forward. My legs felt leaden, my will a frayed thread. The woman in the mirror, my future self, remained, her expression unchanged under a grim, knowing acceptance. "Don't," she mouthed, the word barely visible through the distorted silver. The black sand pulsed around my ankles, a tangible manifestation of the force pulling me onward. It felt less like sand now, more like a viscous fluid, clinging to my boots, slowing my progress. The scent of ozone intensified, burning the back of my throat. The former patients pressed closer, their vacant eyes reflecting the candlelight like pools of stagnant water. Their silent presence was a physical weight, a crushing despair that threatened to suffocate me. I tried to remember something Twain, anything Twain before this place, before the birds, before the woman in the mirror, a map, a coastline, a familiar face. But the memories were fragmented, elusive like dreams dissolving in the morning light. Chirp, chirp. The bird's chorus grew louder, more insistent. The Proxy's eyes glowed brighter, their shifting hues emerald, ruby, amethyst, 10-40 mesmerizing, disorienting. The whispers returned, no longer fragmented, but coalescing into a single commanding voice. Follow, obey, become. It wasn't a voice I recognized yet. It felt intimately familiar, woven into the very fabric of my being. I resisted, digging my heels into the polished floor. The black sand yielded, releasing a faint, sulphurous odor. The woman in the mirror shook her head, a silent plea. Fight it, Genevieve. Don't let them take you. The name felt foreign on her lips, a betrayal of something I once was. A flicker of defiance ignited within me, a spark of rebellion against the encroaching darkness. The violin, silent for only a heartbeat, began to play again. A single, mournful note, stretched and distorted, a lament for a life already lost. Food, wine, screech, drip. The sound seemed to emanate from the very walls, vibrating through my bones. The Proxy pushed harder, its claws digging into my arm. The corridor stretched before me, seemingly endless, lined with rows and rows of porcelain birds. Each one was identical, each one a miniature sentinel of my impending doom. The candlelight flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. I stumbled, my vision blurring, the black sand clinging to my skin like a second, suffocating layer. You can't win, the commanding voice echoed in my mind. Resistance is futile. Embrace the chorus. The woman in the mirror smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that felt like a condemnation. Her eyes held a profound sadness, a resignation that chilled me to the core. Then the corridor ended. I emerged into a vast chamber far larger than anything I had seen within the asylum. The walls were lined with the porcelain birds, thousands upon thousands of them, their eyes reflecting the candlelight in a dizzying, hypnotic display. The chirping was deafening, a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter my sanity. The Proxy led me to the center of the chamber, where a single, ornate pedestal stood. Upon it rested a single, perfect porcelain bird, larger than the others, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. The woman in the mirror was gone. The black sand swirled around my feet, coalescing into a dark, shimmering pool. The commanding voice resonated within my mind stronger than ever before. Join the chorus, Genevieve. Become one with the song. I looked up at the porcelain birds, their eyes fixed on me, their chirping a relentless hypnotic pulse. The scent of ozone filled my lungs, suffocating me. I felt a tremor run through me, a deep-seated certainty that this was the end. The final note of the violin hung in the air, a mournful farewell, click, click, click. The pedestal felt cold beneath my trembling fingers. The air in the chamber vibrated, not just with the chirping of the birds, but with something deeper, a resonant hum that settled in my bones. It wasn't a sound I heard, so much as a feeling, a pressure against my skull. The commanding voice, previously a disembodied echo, now seemed to emanate from the porcelain bird on the pedestal, its glowing eyes boring into mine. Join the chorus, Genevieve. Become one with the song. The phrase repeated, layering itself over the incessant chirping, each repetition twisting it into something more insidious, more persuasive. I looked down at my hands, at the black sand clinging to my skin. It wasn't merely clinging, it was wintegrating. Tiny grains burrowed into my pores, a subtle invasion. I tried to brush them off, but they returned instantly, as if drawn back by an unseen force. A memory surfaced, fractured and distorted, Fundy, a childhood lesson on cartography, tracing coastlines on parchment, the meticulous detail, the unwavering precision. Was this what they were doing to me? Mapping me, charting my descent? The Proxy shifted, its emerald eyes flashing, and I understood with a chilling clarity that it wasn't just guiding me, it was architecting me. The birds weren't merely broadcasting. They were building something within me, something I couldn't comprehend. The woman in the mirror's warning resonated, a desperate plea lost in the escalating cacophony. Fight it, Genevieve. Don't let them take you. But how could I fight something I didn't understand? Something that felt disturbingly like a part of myself. The scraping of porcelain against stone echoed around the chamber. I looked up and saw, with a sickening lurch of my stomach, that the porcelain birds were subtly shifting. Not a violent movement, but a minute adjustment, a realignment of their positions. They were arranging themselves, forming a pattern, a design. The candlelight flickered, casting elongated, distorted shadows that danced across the walls, mimicking the birds' movements. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of dust and something else. Something akin to ozone, but laced with a sweetness that felt profoundly wrong. The black sand continued to spread, a relentless tide consuming the floor. It obscured the edges of the chamber, blurring the boundaries of reality. I felt a growing disorientation, a sense of detachment from my own body. The chirping intensified, morphing into a single sustained note that resonated within my skull. It felt as if the birds were attempting to overwrite my thoughts, to replace my memories with their own. Click, click, click. The sound was new, distinct from the chirping. It was the sound of ceramic joints moving, of delicate mechanisms engaging. I turned my gaze towards the pedestal and saw it. One of the porcelain birds, the one closest to me, was extending a hand. A delicate, ceramic hand, perfectly formed, reaching out towards my face. It wasn't a gesture of aggression, but of integration, of merging. The commanding voice echoed in my mind, no longer a command, but an invitation. Become one, Genevieve. Complete the design. I felt a tremor run through me, a deep-seated certainty that resistance was futile. The memories, the coastline, the familiar face, they were fading, dissolving into the swirling black sand. The violin's final note stretched, distorted, a mournful lament for a self that was rapidly disappearing. My own heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the chirping, a morbid rhythm marking the end of my individuality. The Proxy nudged me forward, its eyes glowing with an unsettling triumph. The ceramic hand drew closer. The mirror shimmered, not with reflected light, but with a nascent darkness. It wasn't a distortion, not exactly. It was a replacement. My hand rose almost involuntarily, drawn towards the cool, smooth surface. I didn't see my own face staring back. Instead, a woman regarded me. Older, worn. A resignation etched into the lines around her eyes that I knew, with a sickening certainty, would one day be my own. It was me, undeniably, yet utterly alien. A ghost of a future I was rapidly becoming. The Proxy, a feline silhouette against the candlelight orange of the room, watched with those shifting, unnatural eyes. Emerald bled into violet, then a sickly chartreuse. It sat perfectly still, a silent sentinel guarding the inevitable. The black sand, a creeping tide, had swallowed the chamber entirely. The edges of the room were lost, the walls indistinct. It felt like standing within a void, a swirling vortex of granular darkness. The violin's melody, the relentless, mournful drone, peaked, a final protracted note that seemed to unravel the very fabric of the air. Then silence, a silence so absolute it pressed against my eardrums, a physical weight. Fudarak. Ang. The sound reverberated through the stone, a slow, agonizing scrape. The heavy iron gates, previously unnoticed, began to move. Each rotation of the gears a death knell. The metal screamed, a protracted agony of rusted hinges protesting their forced obedience. The sound was not merely heard, but felt. A vibration that resonated deep within my bones, a confirmation of my imprisonment. My future self in the mirror didn't flinch, didn't plead, didn't even acknowledge my presence, just a quiet, accepting gaze. The kind of gaze one reserves for a fate already sealed. A faint tremor ran through me, a surrender. The memories, the cartography lessons, the coastline traced on parchment, the woman's warning, they felt distant, fragile, like butterflies pinned beneath glass. They were fading, not violently, but with the slow, inexorable erosion of time. I saw it then, the understanding, the cycle. It wasn't a rebellion, not a fight. It was a relay, a passing of the torch, a handing over of the burden. The Proxy, oblivious to the cosmic horror it facilitated, blinked slowly. A low purr rumbled in its chest, a sound that seemed to mock my fleeting resistance. The spectral narrator, a voice I barely registered as my own, echoed within my mind. It always comes back, Genevieve. The song demands its continuation. A cold certainty settled over me, a chilling acceptance of my role in this macabre performance. There was no escape, there was only the embrace. My gaze drifted downwards, drawn to the jar of black sand. It sat on the floor, a small, unassuming vessel containing an infinite darkness. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, a hypnotic rhythm that mirrored the slow, deliberate beat of my own heart. The porcelain birds, arranged in their silent, geometric pattern, watched with their unblinking eyes. Their forms were perfect, inhuman, a mockery of life. A smile, faint and hesitant, touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of joy or even of resignation. It was something else, a recognition. Emerging, the fear had receded, leaving behind a strange, unsettling calm. The resistance was gone, extinguished like a dying ember. The weight of the world, the burden of the song felt manageable. My hand, no longer trembling, reached out. Not towards the mirror, not towards the proxy, but towards the jar of black sand. The granules shifted, whispering against the glass. A subtle fihisi escaped the jar, like the exhalation of a sleeping beast. The candlelight flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced across the room, mimicking the movements of the porcelain birds. The scent of dust and ozone intensified, a sweet, sickly fragrance that clung to the back of my throat. My fingers brushed against the cool surface of the glass.